Hey everyone, before we get started, I have one quick announcement. If you are listening to this early enough on the day it came out, so that's today, November 14th, we are having our monthly live Q&A at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So go to ADHDrewired.com/events to get registered so you can join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewire team to get some of your ADHD related questions answered. And if you've been thinking about joining our coaching and accountability groups, you can stick around after our live Q&A so you can get registered for our winter season, which starts on January 11th of 2024. This is our kickoff event right after the live Q&A. So we will help you through the whole process. So even if you haven't done anything yet regarding the coaching groups, you can stick around and get your questions answered, and we will walk you through the process. For more information about our coaching groups, head on over to coachingrewired.com to get registered. Our live Q&A today at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 Eastern. Go to ADHDrewired.com, click on the events tab at the top of the page, and we hope to see you there. Now, on with the show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. We are here. It is October. We're recording this during our ADHD Awareness Month. So we're looking forward to answering all of your questions. If you are here live, you can join us right after today's session for a conversation about our upcoming coaching groups. But right now, we are going to answer your questions. And we actually happen to have a question about coaching. So this comes from Lisa, who asks, for those who have done some individual coaching work on ADHD, how can group offer to help with further progress if we have already learned some strategies? I think that for me, one of the reasons I think group coaching is such a highly impactful way to do coaching, I think that we all have this sort of expertise on our own experience, and when we can sort of share that with others, and it becomes very kind of validating when other people are sharing stories that we thought we were the only ones that have experienced that, and as ADHDers, we tend to try a lot of things. And as we were talking, right before we record, Brian was talking about how he has a professional organizer coming in today. And I was sharing with Brian some of my experiences using a professional organizer, and it wasn't great for that reason. It was a one-on-one thing. They weren't asking questions. So when we do this kind of stuff in a group setting, we all have these experiences that we can share, and it really becomes this sort of collective wisdom that is shared within the group. Would anyone else like to add to that? And I just realized I didn't introduce anyone else here because it's ADHD Awareness Month, and that would just, make too much sense. So let's do a quick introduction as step 2. We have Laura next to me. Hello, Laura.
Hello, hello.
And we have Lisa. How you doing?
Hi, good. Happy Tuesday.
Happy
ADHD Awareness
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
ADHD Awareness Tuesday. I'm so aware of the ADHD right now. And we have Coach Brian. How you doing, Brian?
Hello. Doing well. Thank you.
And Coach Kristen is with us in her thoughts as she's trying to get an internet connection at a hotel because she is at a conference. She's at a play therapy conference. So we may or may not be seeing her pop in at some point. All right. So, Brian, do you have thoughts on this question?
On individual versus group coaching?
Yes.
I think they're both great, but the power of group coaching is really undeniable, at least in my experience. As what you were alluding to is that, we can describe the ADHD, we can listen to a description of the ADHD experience and relate to it, but when we hear it from another person and we can, really empathize with them, that we have the shared experience, that can be transformative unto itself, because we tend to isolate. We have issues with shame and self-judgment, and we've internalized all the judgment that's been coming at us from the neurotypical world our whole lives, so that we tend to isolate and conceal and mask. And when we get into an environment where we don't have to do that, magic happens. People open up. Things change. That's what really, I think, moved the needle for me after trying to manage my ADHD on my own for many, many, many years. As ADHD people, we have a shared experience, and we have all spent our lives trying to solve the same kind of problems. So sharing that combined experience is really, I don't think you can get a better deal with that than in coaching.
And Brian, maybe you feel the same way that like sometimes what can even feel more frustrating is when you've learned the strategies and you're still not doing the strategies.
Mhm.
That's ADHD. And I think that's one of the huge reasons why not only is group such an impactful sort of way to do this because of the accountability piece, but that we also know that in our coaching community, we offer a lot of stuff for our alumni, right? Because it's like we tend to be able to do these sprints. And I look at a sprint of somewhere between like 6 to 10 weeks of like, all right, I can really focus on that. But then what happens after that? Because, we always tell people that after the 10 weeks of our coaching group, that you're still going to have ADHD, right? And so being able to do the work and have that maintenance of, all right, like I got to keep coming back to these things is really, really helpful in a community and group environment. Laura.
I always like to say that there are 3 reasons that people come to our coaching groups. And those 3 reasons are to learn hard skills, to work with their emotional acceptance of their ADHD, and to find community. Some of us need all 3. Some of us might need 2. Some of us might just need that one. And usually that one is the community piece, I would say. So, on that front, strategies are the thing, the hard skills are the thing that it sounds like you already have under your belt. And that's fantastic. Coming in with those tools is wonderful, particularly given that you can share those tools with your peers. And you might really make a difference in somebody else's life just because of something that you've already learned. That said, those strategies aren't emotional acceptance of ADHD. Beyond emotional acceptance of ADHD, we also have emotional regulation with ADHD. So those 2 woven together are a really big subject that we don't really look at, within just a hard skills scenario. And I'm running on a very little amount of sleep right now, so I apologize if I'm not quite as articulate as usually.
That was great. Brian and Kristen's here. Hi, Kristen. Brian, go ahead.
I was just going to riff off of what Laura was saying about the difference between the hard skills and the emotional regulation piece and those different aspects of them. We like to cover them all in our coaching program. And that was my takeaway experience when I was started off here as a coaching member back in season 22. And I came in for the hard skills and learned kind of the hard way through the 10 weeks that it was really the emotional regulate acceptance and the community that I actually really needed. What I came away with it of experience was like that they're completely intertwined. If you're trying to address one without addressing the other, if you're trying to address, how do I just learn how to schedule better and get more organized, but without dealing with the emotional regulation and the emotional acceptance piece, my metaphor for that is like that's like driving a car with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, because you're still dragging the resistance of all that emotional baggage behind you.
And Brian, I imagine you've heard this in group too, but people say that like they come in thinking they've actually done the acceptance work and realize like, oh, there's more layers to this onion than I originally thought.
Yeah, well, there's saying something and knowing something. It's easy to say, oh, I'm ADHD, I accept my ADHD, and da-da-da. That's different to know that. It's different to believe that. It's different. That's different than being ready to enforce your boundaries around that.
For sure. It was a great question. And obviously, we love talking about it. We love helping the ADHD community, and we see how impactful this is. All right, let's go to another question here. As for all the podcast listeners, Kristen's been struggling to get in, and she's here maybe with a decent connection. We're not sure yet. We'll find out in a
Talk
little
about emotional regulation problems. Poor Lisa, I burned her text up.
Well, glad that you are here, making some time away from your play therapy conference. All right. Do we have another question? Anyone want to go live?
Not too many go lives today.
No worries. So let's look at the next question. Creating processes for recurring tasks is very helpful, but at the same time, it's easy to go too far and make those processes too complex. How do you draw the line between a useful process and one that is so complex that it becomes dreadful and ends up getting in the way? Any tips on creating processes for recurring tasks? I'm curious, Gene, how far along in the process you are. Because to me, that sounds a lot like the, I don't know, kind of like the experimentation acceptance phase of like, oh, I need to create these processes and routine type things. Oh, this is really hard. I'm making this too complex. How do I figure this out? For me, one of the things that, and this is kind of cuts into a little bit of this sort of like perfectionism piece around process creation. Anytime I ask myself the question, am I overcomplicating this? The answer 99.9% of the time is yes. I am overcomplicating this. So it's like, what would the simplest solution be? And sometimes it's showing it to someone else and ask them, hey, how would you approach this? Right. But sometimes we need to create that kind of Rube Goldberg machine of over complexity to realize that we've made this thing too complex. And that I think in that process, it can help us find a better solution for sort of processes on reoccurring types of tasks. Kristen?
A couple things with this one. One thing I think of, and I'm going to drop a reminder word for y'all to help me get to my second thought, the Socratic method. That's the tip to remind me to get back to the second thought. The first thought on this is, yes, about the perfectionism. I totally agree. I also am a big, it's kind of like when we say you can't change all your habits at once. This is how I perceive this, is that you've got too many steps in there that you actually probably aren't sure if each of those steps work for you or in sync with your brain and how it functions. And that could be why you keep adding those different layers of steps to it, the complexity part. So, Socratic method, I was thinking of, and I hope that's the right phrase. That's the way lawyers tend to learn in school. My husband's a lawyer, and we had a family visit, and they taught us that at the very first, before they ever got started. And it's the idea of asking yourself the question, okay, what is this step? How's that going to help me? And so after that step, well, the next step I'm at, how's that going to help me? I think you could also reframe it into, how do you actually build the steps? That would be telling you how your brain is thinking, the Socratic part, that part of going into why you've added these steps. But then if you back off, create a blank slate and go, what's the first step to this that would help me? And then what's the next step? However, I encourage you to go, what's the first step that would help me? Practice that first. Because if you add all these layers and you don't get past the first or second, that system's never going to work anyway. So approach it from, okay, I'm going to create a system. This is my thing I've been working on. I'm going to create a system, and I've got to know that I've got the first step down, the first layer. That way, all your gears, think of the gears in a machine. If that first gear doesn't work, nothing else banks off of that and keeps going. This, like I said, you kind of got in my brain that I've been working on a whole lot of this whole year. I was working on building systems, and I figured that out. Is if I didn't have the first or second step, it was a no-go anyway.
And the other piece to that is build a system while you're doing the work. Don't do it separately in sort of the abstract. You're going to miss stuff. Like there's going to be stuff that you didn't consider. It is just way easier to it's sort of this idea of documentation as you go instead of documentation ahead of time, right? Like I think that neurotypical brains can maybe do the documentation ahead of time. I have never been able to do that. Like as much as I've tried, I will have huge holes in it, and then I sort of test them out. I'm like, oh, I forgot this whole phase. So I have found that to really create systems around repeatable things to really capture as I go and as I'm doing the work. Brian?
I was going to add from my coaching and my section, one phrase I like to use when some of our coaching members are intimidated by approaching a process like this, like starting a process or building something that seems complex and they're worried about managing it. I always urge them to dare to start small. It seems counterintuitive, but a lot of people rush into these situations with a lot of excitement. They want it to work. They have this emotional attachment to the idea. I want this to work out. So I'm going to put more effort into planning it and making it a more sophisticated, more fancy looking model. It's actually a little bit more vulnerable to start with a small thing. Start with that and then observe and then build the habit from there. Basically let the habit or the routine evolve as it's needed instead of trying to plan it out on a piece of paper ahead of time. So yeah, just starting with smaller steps and then observing how those work without judgment and then building a second step and letting the process evolve a little bit more organically. Sometimes, maybe a little bit more slow going, but it's better than designing a process that fails really quickly.
Thanks, Brian. Laura?
So I have an overwrought metaphor on this one. I'm thinking about this like decluttering because, in a sense, we're looking at decluttering the process that we put in place for getting these things done. So, in this metaphor, I'm thinking of the process as a bunch of bins. You know how we go to Target or IKEA and buy a whole bunch of bins to just shove our junk into? We
Mm-hmm.
keep doing that in hopes of the goal of getting our house under control. So, in this context, we need less stuff. So, I'm wondering within this super overworked metaphor, is the process masking what you're actually trying to get done? And I think we need to declutter that process in order to examine the output that we're actually trying to get to. Because sometimes it also turns out that the thing that we're trying to do, the reason the process is so complex is because the thing we're trying to do is too complex and needs to be broken down into smaller pieces.
Can I just say that's the part of the SMART goals thing? They're realistic. Are you being realistic in your thing? And then I have a pondering question around what Laura shared. I literally thought of decluttering, and I will throw things into bins and then I will think I'm cleaning up a room, but I've just moved the bin into another room. Do you think we might do that with systems? Like we go, oh, well, this step, maybe it doesn't go here. I'm just going to move it over here. And we don't admit that the step is extraneous.
You mean
I
like
kind of wonder.
creating the whole board on Asana for all my recurring tasks and then not opening it for a while because I've been using a notebook for a while?
Yes. I kind of wonder if we do that with systems. That's interesting.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Wow.
And so does all the bins. That also sounds familiar. Yeah. Throwing things away is hard and like boiling it down to the simplest component. I think that one of the things that I try to keep in mind when I'm doing anything is scope creep. My brain's an idea factory. Like it creates new ideas and what about this? Oh, what about this? Right. And if I allowed myself to act on every what about this thought, I would get nothing done ever. Right. And I would just be working hard with nothing to show for it. And it would be frustrating as hell. So simplify. And then the other thing, if you are trying any kind of new system, whether it's a system of creating recurring tasks or a system for how you declutter, whatever you're trying, throw a question to yourself in your calendar. It could be in a week, it could be in a month, it could be in a couple months. To ask yourself, how is this system working for me? And if you have an idea about how long you tend to be able to stick with a particular system before it kind of ADHD fades, then try to throw that question into your calendar right around that time so it can kind of catch you right before the system fades. One of the things that we really do help people with in our coaching groups is being able to say no. And when we actually know like how long things take and what our actual commitments are, we stop going into the saying yes because we're just really nice people pleasers. And we say no because part of it is we don't want to disappoint people and we know we can't actually meet that commitment. So it becomes easier to say no. Let's go to another question. All right. We got Daniel who's joining us live. Daniel, what is your question?
Long-time listener, first-time caller or questioner. I wanted to throw this out there because it's just topical for me as a parent this week. My kids we're having like parent-teacher conference week. I've got a sixth grader, fourth grader that was diagnosed ADHD about a year ago, and then a first grader. I was diagnosed a few years ago, but my wife was also diagnosed recently. And so it just feels like, okay, like it's definitely a certainty that there's some neurodiversity for our whole family. But I don't want to like direct the teachers, but it's like, what's the right way, or are there do's and don'ts, or do I let it lie and let them come to us? It's just so it's not exactly a simple question, but I'm just curious what the group's experiences may have been in that arena, and if anyone has any perspective on that they can share.
Daniel, no one is going to advocate for your kids like you are, right? And I think it's really like being mindful of how the school staff is perceiving what you're doing. Yes, and this is your kid, right? So say the things that you feel like need to be said. This whole like, I want to see if they notice anything and bring it to our attention. Teachers are busy. Like if there's a concern, bring it to your kid's teacher's attention. I think it's important to not hold back. And I hear when I used to have my clinical practice, I would often people would ask me this question of, well, if we're going to introduce medication, I kind of don't want to say anything to the teachers to see if they notice anything. I'm like, why? Like, I understand it, and on one hand, it's like they want to see if there's a wow, but I think it's really helpful for us to all be on the same page with our schools, with our kids' schools, because it's hard, and not everyone is going to get what you're trying to do, and so it's about building relationships, and also knowing what your rights are is also really important. But like trying not to come in saying, "I know my rights," right? Because then it creates this adversarial relationship. Right. Kristen?
So, hi, Daniel. This was the seed that was planted in me. I'm a music theater person. I taught dance all my life. My oldest is severely autistic. My second one has other issues too. And my third one has social anxiety. I hear what you're asking. You're asking, basically thinking about it like this. You need the pitch for getting them to buy in. Talk about making me grow up. We may not advocate for ourselves very well, but boy, howdy, I can advocate for my kids quicker than anything. And I wasn't like a teen mom, but I was a young mom, and I got courage really fast. And I approached it like a teaching. One of my favorite things to tell them is, the client is the expert. It's not even the parent a lot of times. So a couple of things I would invite you to do is always invite your child to any of those meetings, at least for the initial portion of the meeting. The child needs to know that they are part of the plan because they are the expert. And a lot of times they have the answers and we just don't know it because we didn't ask them the questions. The other piece is realize that the teacher is the expert in their own classroom. So it's creating that sense of an egalitarian type team. Whether that be you, your wife, your teacher, and your kid, you, your wife, your teacher, whoever is showing up to the meeting, get it on an egalitarian table. Everyone has an expertise in their own corner. That's a really big thing to me. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know either. Maybe we're all sitting here and we don't know. I also agree with Eric. It's kind of not fair. You're throwing your teacher into battle without any armor. They don't know the battle plan. Yeah, you could tell them they're on medication, because then they're going to look for it. They've got, 19, 20, 23 other kids in the room they're looking at. Give them something to be looking for. I highly encourage that too. I'd never thought about that because I'd never heard that. But I do believe it's probably there for sure. I know you heard it in your practice. And Eric, I am very super stimulated because I'm at a conference, so shut me down when I talk too much. And good luck, Daniel. And sit down and have have that team meeting with your kid at home. Prepare them. Yeah.
Part of your question was, are there any do's and don'ts? So do understand that teachers are busy and have more to do than they realistically have time to do. Try not to get emotionally dysregulated when talking to the teachers and the school staff, because here's what happens when that happens often. Now we're just being viewed as the, irrational, emotional parent, and they're not actually looking at the actual issue, right? Which absolutely can be challenging. I know when I started doing IEPs with my own son, I used to be hired to go in with my clients to these IEP meetings. And when it was for my own kid, it's like I forgot everything I know and like I need someone to help me. So I brought in an advocate to come in with me to sort of be that other voice, because I got emotional anytime there was a moment where like, wait, I don't think they understand what I'm trying to say here, right? Like I got really frustrated, and having someone that can look at it from a less emotionally attached perspective can be super, super helpful. Other do's, documentation. If you have a conversation with a teacher, follow it up with an email. Here's what we talked about. Thanks, right? The paper trail is everything. I know that sucks when we have ADHD because that's hard. Knowing some language, like if you're in the US, right, there are laws that govern special education. And one of the things that a little phrase that's really helpful to know, it's an acronym called FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education in the Least Restrictive Environment. These are all legal terms in education. So they are not entitled to the best education ever. They are entitled to an appropriate education, which, by the way, no state has ever defined what that actually means, but just know that. So if you say, like, I want the best thing for my kid, like, they don't have to do that. So learning to use some of that language can be really helpful. It's been a little while since I've looked at it, but I know that the Wright's Law website is a great website for special education law and kind of frameworks for working with your school. Was that helpful, Daniel?
Super helpful. Thank you guys. Really, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for asking your question. All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have more of your questions. So we will be right back. Are you in search of a supportive space where you can gain practical skills, develop emotional acceptance, and go from analysis paralysis to action and engage with others who genuinely understand the experiences of living with ADHD? That's where ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups can help. Our intensive coaching program is specifically tailored for individuals with ADHD. We understand the unique challenges you face, from staying on task to managing time effectively, from dealing with overwhelm to maintaining motivation. In our groups, you'll find a supportive community that understands you. You're not alone in your journey. Together, we'll set realistic goals, develop personalized strategies, and help you create structured accountability that makes sense for your life. Your ADHD doesn't need to define you in a negative way. With the right support and strategies, this winter can be a season of transformation. And for the entrepreneurs and business owners among us, an added benefit, our coaching groups can potentially be a business expense. That's right, investing in your productivity and mental well-being might not just transform your work life, but could also be tax deductible. And for all of you employees out there, if you're already open about your ADHD at work, we've had many participants who've had their employers invest in them by paying for them to be in our group. And if you're not out about your ADHD, but your work offers financial assistance for trainings, we have had participants also get their employers to pay for our groups. And you can tell them that this is a class for time management, prioritization, and goal setting, which is all true. You don't actually have to tell them it's for ADHD if you don't want to. Plus, our reduced 2020 pricing is back all season long. So this holiday season, why not give yourself the gift of coaching? Make new friends, develop new skills and habits, and discover the magic of being a part of an amazing community of ADHDers. Because here at ADHD reWired, we believe that ADHD is better when we're together.
I decided to join the group because I'd listened to the podcast for 4 years and I knew I'd wanted to do ARC since I first heard Eric talking about it at the very beginning of the podcast.
Before, I would ask myself, what do I even offer to the world? I was just in a really low place. I didn't know what to expect. It was just absolutely worth it.
I've never heard of anyone else struggling the way I feel I do.
I really feel this way, that this changed my life.
I am most proud of being able to be vulnerable, especially in my masterminds. It's hard for me because I'm not used to people being supportive of me when I'm in a state of like not having achieved something. So that's something that's actually really difficult for me.
I'm most proud of how, despite how difficult these 10 weeks have been, not just in terms of work for this program, but many personal stressors, I didn't give up.
What I've accomplished in 10 weeks, I didn't do it alone. I did it with all of you. I did it with my A team. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
If you're thinking about joining this group, do it. If you're stuck and you know you need that extra push to help meet your goals but don't know where to start here.
When I think of success, I now think of the bravery that it takes to live a life with our condition unapologetically and with compassion. I think that the default mode that we're made to feel in society is to just feel shame and just feel all of these things that have been attributed to us all our lives. But I think realizing now that there's a lot of courage and bravery in vulnerability and sharing what you're struggling with, and then having the courage to advocate for yourself and just live unapologetically.
It just completely changed my outlook. I'm learning to reframe things. I see value in myself. I see where I can succeed. I see where I can have a lot of growth.
If you're thinking about joining this group, if you think you need this, it's probably time to do it.
If you're thinking of joining this group, I would say absolutely do it. 100%, you will not regret it. You'll gain such a greater understanding of yourself, and you will find a community just jumping out of their virtual chairs to support you. You get out of this program what you put into it. Be ready to be open, honest, and vulnerable with both yourself and your group. You are only cheating yourself if you don't, and there's a huge potential for growth if you do.
If you're thinking of joining this group, just do it. You cannot regret this. You will not regret it. You only have gains. It's hard, but it's so worth it.
So don't ADHD alone. Learn more about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups at coachingrewired.com. Space is limited. Get started now, or tell your smart speaker to remind you to go to coachingrewired.com. Come grow with us. That's coachingrewired.com. We are back. And Lisa, can you share the next question for us?
Of course. So this one's from Jenny V. It says, because ADHD sometimes comes with emotional dysregulation, which sometimes happens to me at not so opportune times, do you have any tips or strategies for coaching oneself beforehand, or ways to get oneself out of dysregulation when it's happening?
Brian, you want to jump on that one?
Why are you asking me, Eric?
You had it all over your face. So like, I can relate to this one.
My mind was racing. There's a lot of things that you can do there. Everyone is familiar with CBT, but not many people are familiar with DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. Am I saying that correctly, Eric?
Yep.
Yeah, which has a little bit more of a somatic approach. I actually took a little course on this a year or two ago. And there's all kinds of things that you can do to kind of interrupt that dysregulation in your body, because our feelings do exist in our body. We like to perceive them as existing only in our brains, but they are a physiological response that affects our whole nervous system. So calming the whole nervous system, or pattern interrupting that cycle of emotional dysregulation, is what can get us back on track. And there's lots of options for that. There is breath work, deep breathing work, which I am a huge fan of. I do regularly on a daily basis. There is exposure to cold, whether it's an ice cube on the wrist or taking a cold shower or a swim. Something like that can really kind of be like a reset exercise. Yoga, stretching, push-ups. There's a whole bunch of options that you could do to just like kind of take a more somatic approach of actually calming or interrupting that agitated cycle in your nervous system. I don't know how much more specific I should get, but
if you need more to share, please do.
I'm good, thank you. Just kidding. I would say out of all those options, I mean, I would just advise someone to get curious. But like, yeah, I can't. Breath work and mindfulness in the form of breath work and meditation are really great tools that I use myself on a daily basis. And I would strongly point people in that direction if they're looking for like a tool to get them out of an emotionally dysregulated state. Or more precisely, with like meditation, if done regularly, it kind of soothes the ambient environment to the point where you kind of train your nervous system to be less reactive over time.
One of the things that we talk about in our coaching groups is our tendencies, right? And if we know and are becoming more self-aware of our tendencies and how we tend to show up in different settings and different contexts. Like if we know that we might have to have a conversation with someone we don't really get along with. And let's say you didn't get a great night's sleep the night before. It might be best to do everything you can to avoid that conversation that day. Because if you know, like, this is probably not going to go well for me, see if you can reschedule that meeting if that's a possibility. The other piece, and what Brian was saying is so true, that like so much of the stuff does live in the body. And I think that's for a lot of us, I think emotional dysregulation is not just an ADHD thing. I mean, several months ago, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. I've been doing EMDR therapy for the last several months. It's super hard because it manages to get you in your body. And part of why I'm doing it is because I have noticed that there are certain scenarios where my brain just kind of freezes. And I couldn't really attribute those scenarios to just ADHD. I think there's other stuff that is going on. So I've been working with this great therapist doing EMDR, and she combines it with IFS, which looks at like parts of self kind of work. And so if you're not familiar with EMDR, stands for eye motion desensitization. I just have to work through the acronym in my head.
Desensitization,
reprocessing.
Yes,
Thank you.
A mouthful.
Yes. And it's funny because like it's not even necessarily to do with the eyes. It's about bilateral stimulation. So what I do with my therapist is it's using bilateral stimulation music while we're meeting, and we meet virtually. So yeah, Can
I jump on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I've had a lot more EMDR I know Eric really recently started, and I am trained in it. Yes, because I don't want to misinform anyone. It does have to do with the eyes, in that if you eventually sit down and do the actual reprocessing piece, which can be a long buildup, there's so many different stages with this, that you literally are following a dot on the screen with your eyes going back and forth. However, they have adapted all these different other types of interventions within the model too. So that's really interesting, Eric, because I had not heard that yet. You hadn't shared that part with me. And that's a new one. Yeah, because I didn't want to confuse anyone out there that may have had it and go, well, I do the eyes. Yeah.
Laura, go ahead.
I think that there are three pieces to this, which is looking at before, during, and after when we are having an encounter with somebody. And also, I want to say, I think this is the hardest part of having ADHD. So, in terms of the before and during, if we can accept certain pieces ahead of time, you can literally plan ahead and tell the other person that you're talking to, hey, these things might happen. My voice might shake. I might cry. I have trouble talking when I'm crying, but I really want to have this conversation with you. And so we can use this conversation even when we're having physical trouble. And this can tame some of those physical responses because we're not embodying that anxiety about those behaviors quite as much. So that's the during, the before and during. And then afterwards, having a plan for the after before is a really good idea. You have to know that this is going to be over. And you want to be prepared ahead of time to self-soothe and know what is good for you and what is going to fill your cup and what isn't just going to be a numbing behavior. Because it's very easy to just go do that thing that you know is going to give you the immediate sensation of relief. And instead, maybe it is that deep breathing. Maybe it is even having just a mindful cup of tea. Maybe it's literally mindfully washing the dishes.
I also think that exercise, both or either before or after, can be so helpful with sort of dealing with either increasing our capacity for dealing with hard situations or dealing with that sort of flood of hormones that tend to flood our body when we're getting dysregulated. Like exercise is though, we don't think through our emotional dysregulation. These are physical things that are happening in our body, and we need to do something physically to respond to it. So if you're feeling angry, go run, go hit a punching bag, do something physical. If you're feeling anxious, take those deep breaths, and even the physical exercise can help with that as well. And look, with all things, experiment until you find the things that work for you. All right, next question.
This one says, what is the alumni community like? Is it different from the ADHD reWired Facebook group and from the ADHD study hall? Also, is it very active? And what do people use it for?
Yes. So what is it like? I'm going to actually ask my team to share that. Kristen?
It is amazing. I am a brick and mortar, go into the classroom girl kind of person. I don't mean class, I mean meeting, activities. I'm a group person. It helps me get things done. Yes, it's virtual. It has a time set for me. If there is an event like Clean With Me, I can put that on my calendar. I don't have to decide when I'm going to do my laundry and the dishes. I have just gotten to where I go do that on Wednesdays during Clean With Me. It's reduced so many decision-making things for me. And everybody else in that space is doing something they hate. And we are commiserating together. We are tipping each other. We are giving ideas of how to stand the smells of cleaning a bathroom. I mean, and this is just one little tiny corner of the Mighty Network event. I have what I believe are truer friends than some of my friends in person through this community, through the support and the shared feelings that go along with our neurodiverse brains. That's my little, just tiny bit. I got so much more I can say about it, but Laura's got something.
Laura, go ahead.
I wanted to just come at this from a macro perspective. The alumni community is vast, and I kind of think of it almost as like a small ocean or a sea. It's made up of a whole bunch of individual ADHDers, and all of us know some of us. So as time goes on, we gain more relationships among each other because we are going to these events like Kristen talked about. And simply the longer that you're in the alumni community, the more people you are going to eventually be connected to. The really exciting part for me was I knew I was going to get acquaintances out of ADHD reWired. I didn't realize I was going to get really good friends. That's been such a joy. pretty much. We just watching relationships grow, both between me and other people and between other people. I also wanted to just add that I really value the events. I frequently don't want to go to the events. I have that little rebellious voice in my head saying, I don't want to do this. And I'm always happy that I went. It's social. It's almost always a growth opportunity. And when it is not a growth opportunity, it means that we're doing something like happy hour, which means we're getting to hang out with our friends. So,
Brian.
Well, I would like to just pick up on something Eric said earlier. We have an intensive 10-week coaching program, and at the end of that 10 weeks, you will still have ADHD. Many of our potential coachees ask us, we're in registration season right now, and a lot of our potential coachees ask us, well, what do people do after the 10 weeks? What are the potential outcomes after the 10 weeks? And I always say that really depends largely on how much you stick with it, how much you are practicing these skills, how much you are still implementing them. And the Alumni Network is a very great resource and tool for keeping that alive in your life and keeping you focusing on it through the power of community. You're sharing this experience with other people, but also using these useful tools available to you on a regular basis. So it's the maintenance, it's learning how to take the stuff we learn in the 10-week intensive coaching program and implement it on an ongoing basis in our own lives on a daily, but the systems that we create on our own afterwards. And the alumni community is designed basically to just give you like a sandbox to do that in. It's also a great opportunity to create and do your own things. After I went through season 22, I stayed around in the alumni community, and I eventually started doing my own facilitated sessions on there. I saw a need for a tool that I needed, so I figured other ADHD people would need to do it. And then if I presented it, I would be accountable to show up and actually do that and work on my own stuff. And yeah, I've been running that quite a while now, probably close to 2 years,
yeah.
year and a half. And I found that to be very successful. And then springboarding off of that, I'm now coaching. I mean, I think I've, pat on the back, I think I've leveraged it about as much as anyone could leverage it. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough. I think many of our coaches have a great experience in the coaching program, but then it's very easy for this stuff to just kind of go away in the ether. And I knew that about myself at the end of season 22. I'm like, if I don't have reinforcement, if I don't build systems and scaffolding to keep me in this positive growth-minded headspace, this will just go away. So that's why I stuck to it. That's what I recommend it for, is like the ongoing maintenance and the continuing personal growth after the 10 weeks. The Alumni Network really makes that possible.
One of the things that I often say is that one of the best things that I do for my own ADHD management is this work, because it makes me like, I have to be thinking about this all the time. Like, I think when we have ADHD, like, we don't have the luxury to do life on autopilot. If we try, we crash and burn. Like, it does not turn out well. So like one of the things that I do, and Kristen also does, is we each lead a weekly session where we're looking at various concepts that we've explored in group. We start with a journal prompt. So we'll spend about 10 minutes writing on a journal prompt, and then 5 minutes playing what we call desk hunt, which is like duck hunt, but we are trying to find our desk. So it's a quick 5-minute decluttering. And I'm telling you, if I didn't have that 5 minutes once a week to declutter my desk, I don't even know if I'd be able to find it in this office. And then we do various things like monthly planning, yearly planning. Today, we actually worked on creating DOPA menus. So all kinds of things, sort of like the ADHD productivity variety show once a week. And we offer it live at 2 different times. So I do it on Tuesdays, Kristen does it on Mondays. And there's a ton of member run sessions as well. So that's also there to support our members. And as far as part of the question was about the adult study hall and how is it different, part of what's different is that we don't have coach-led sessions there. We do have some facilitated sessions, but they're not as many. And, just having the experience and going through, the coaching program and getting to continue to work with other members who kind of are speaking a similar language because they've done this program can be super helpful.
Yeah, as a productivity tool, I would just point out in our coaching program, we hit on a concept we call checkpoints, which is a method of building structure into our weeks. So we don't forget to work on things. We don't forget about those long-term projects or whatnot. And it's just a proactive system of organize our weeks by combining, things that are occurring in our environment and aligning what we need to do with them. The facilitated sessions and the other sessions in the Alumni Network are really great checkpoints that you can use as a tool to structure your week around. And that's how many people in the alumni community use them.
Okay. I think that might be all the questions that we have. But I want to thank everyone for being here and have an amazing ADHD Awareness Month. And we hope to see all of you, or at least some of you, in Baltimore at the CHAD conference at the very end of November. So just go to chadd.org to learn more about that. I'll be there. I'm speaking on artificial intelligence and smart tools. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful ADHD Awareness Month. And that's all for this week. Thank you to my team for joining me during last month's Q&A. And if you are listening to this early enough on the day it came out, you can catch today's live Q&A starting at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern by going to ADHDrewired.com and clicking on the events tab at the top of the page to register and join us on Zoom. Have any thoughts you want to share about topics discussed in today's show? Then check out our free Facebook community at ADHDrewired.com/community to apply. And you can always click that share button on your podcast app and share it with someone you know that might benefit from it, or post it on your social media feeds. Also, if you are a writer and want some real-time accountability, or you need some focus friends for things like cleaning, house projects, decluttering, creative work, and more, you can get started with our Adult Study Hall community at adultstudyhall.com. This is virtual co-working. It is free to try for the first week and only $19.99 a month after that. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast and want to support the work that we are doing, please consider becoming a patron over at ADHDrewired.com, where you can get full, uninterrupted episodes with bonus content and announcements at the very end for just $5 a month or more. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. All right, that's all the time we have for today. And for right now, I gotta go finish working on my slides for the CHAD presentation because they're already late. Hey, are you going to go to the conference? It's coming up at the end of November. Go to chadd.org to learn more. And if you do go, come and say hi. Love to see you there.